Well, here we are at the Church Street campus of Layton High, right here on Connor's Corner. And today we're going to be finishing our adventures with the quotes from The Hobbit. It's Wednesday the 13th, and today we will give you these quotes, and then there will be a quiz on these quotes and the ones I read with you last time. And they'll also include a correction sheet, so answer the questions and then submit your answers, correct them, submit your score, and then on Friday we'll have a chance to say goodbye and review our whole quarter together. I'm really looking forward to that. I hope you'll join me then. But let's charge into, we're on quote 19, Bilbo's bravest moment. So they've been up to the top, they've found the keyhole, and Balin has gone partway down into the mountain with Bilbo, but now he's all by himself. This grew to be the unmistakable gurgling noise of some vast animal snoring in its sleep down there in the red glow in front of him. So the dragon is so hot he glows. It was at this point that Bilbo stopped. Going on from there was the bravest thing he ever did. There's no monster more terrible than a dragon, okay? I think they even call the devil a dragon in some places. The tremendous thing that happened afterwards were as nothing compared to it. Wars and all these other things. He fought the real battle in the tunnel alone before he ever saw the vast danger which lay in wait. At any rate, after a short halt, go on he did. So Bilbo might be small, and he might be middle-aged, and he might be just a hobbit with hairy little feet, but my Godfrey, he is willing to face a dragon. And down he goes. Number 20, dragons, their treasures, and the missing cup. Above him, Bilbo, he's the him, the dragon lay, the sleeping dragon lay, a dire menace even in his sleep. He grasped a great two-handled cup, as heavy as he could carry, and cast a fearful eye upwards. Smaug stirred a wing, opened a claw, and rumbled of his snore changed a note. Dragons may not have much real use for all their wealth, but they know it to an ounce as a rule, especially after long possession, and Smaug was no exception. He had passed from an uneasy dream in which a warrior, altogether insignificant in size, but provided with a bitter sword and great courage, figured most unpleasantly, to a doze, and from a doze to wide awake. There was a breath of strange air in his cave. He stirred and stretched forth his neck to sniff. Then he missed the cup. That quick. It only takes him a stretch and a sniff, and he realizes that one tiny bit of his pile of gold is gone. And who does this remind us of? It reminds us of the dragon in Beowulf, which we studied before, who goes out and starts destroying everybody because someone stole from him one cup. And that's what brings Beowulf's life to a heroic end. But this is one of the great steps in Bilbo's heroic life, and long from his end. Okay, now we get to the fact that the dragon's gone. In fact, we soon find out the dragon's dead, but the dragon has left. He's blaming he gets in a big argument with Bilbo down in the cave, and then he flies out and crushes the entrance on the other end, and then he goes looking for the men of Lake Town, from which adventure Smaug never returns. And so Thorin and company, after waiting for as long as they can, sneak down into the treasure chamber and start to explore. And as they explore around, Bilbo, I wonder why Bilbo, comes across the heart of the mountain, the Arkenstone of Thrain. It was the Arkenstone the heart of the mountain. So Bilbo guessed from Thorn's description, but indeed there could be no two such gems, even in so marvelous a hoard, even in all the world. Even as he climbed, the same white gleam had shone before him and drawn his feet toward it. Slowly it grew to a little globe of pallid light. Now as he came near, it was twinked with a flickering spark of many colors on its surface, reflecting and splintering from the wavering light of his torch. At last he looked down upon it and caught his breath. The great jewel shone before his feet of its own inner light, and yet cut and fashioned by the dwarves who had dug it from the heart of the mountain so long ago. It took all the light that fell upon it and changed it into 10,000 sparks of white radiance shot with glints of the rainbow. Suddenly Bilbo's arm went towards it to draw it, drawn by its enchantment. His small hand would not close about it. In other words, it's too big to fit in his hand, for it was larger, and it was a large and heavy gem. But he lifted it, shut his eyes, and put it in his deepest pocket. Now I am a real burglar. So he takes this stone, and you know what he's going to do with it. And his effort to bring peace and order in his true leadership style, he's going to do the thing that's going to be important and impossible for anyone else to do. And it also shows how much he trusts the Elven King, because that's who's going to get it in the end. And the Elven King does return it, as we will see. Number 23, Thorn gives Bilbo a coat of mail, and we've seen pictures of that. Mr. Baggins, he cried, here is the first payment of your reward. Remember, he was promised 1/14 of all the dragon's hoard. And the dwarf hoard is the foundation of it. But the dragon has brought in treasure from all around his realm. Elven treasure, the treasures of Dale, other things that he's captured, and piled them up there. Cast off your old coat and put on this. With that, he put on Bilbo a small coat of mail, wrought for some young elf prince long ago. So when even elves have children, okay? It was of silver steel that the elves call mithril, and with it went a belt of pearls and crystal, a light helm of figured leather, strengthened beneath with hoops of steel, and studded with a brim of white gems, was set upon the hobbit's head. So now he's armored like an elf prince for battle, and this coat plays a very important role throughout the entire rest of the story of the Ring and of Bilbo and Frodo, all those places. This coat is involved. Okay, now they're back out above, getting some air, and the thrush brings Bilbo's words to Bard. The dragon is attacking the city. The dwarves are there at the gates, making it strong because they're afraid that people will come. And the bird flies down to bring Bilbo's message, which he heard before the secret gate was destroyed, to Bard, the true king of Dale. Suddenly out of the dark, something fluttered to his Bard's shoulder. He started. It was only an old thrush. Unafraid, it perched by his ear, and it brought him news, marveling that he found he could understand its tongue, for he was of the race of Dale. Wait, wait, it told him. The moon is rising. Look for the hollow of the left breast as he flies and turns above you. And while Bard paused in wonder, it told him of tidings up in the mountains and all that he had heard. And Bard drew his bowstring to his ear, and the dragon was circling back, flying low. And as he came, the moon rose over the eastern shore and silvered his great wings. So If it hadn't been for Bilbo's courage in tricking the dragon into revealing his secret, then Bard wouldn't have known where to shoot him, and Smaug would still be ruling under the lonely mountain, no doubt. Okay, now Bilbo sneaks out at night, and goes to the one person he trusts most, even though he lived as a burglar inside his palace for a long time until he sneaked the dwarves out. Bilbo wants to go to the Elven King, and he goes to him and he takes the stone and he says, "This is the Arkenstone of Thrain," said Bilbo, "the heart of the mountain. But how is it yours to give?" he asked at last with an effort. "Oh, well," said the hobbit uncomfortably, "it isn't exactly, but well, I am willing to let it stand against my claim. You don't you know, his claim to 1/14 of the value of the treasure. I may be a burglar, or so they say. Personally, I never felt like one, but I'm an honest one. I hope, more or less. Anyway, I am going back now, and the dwarves can do what they like to me. I hope you find this useful." The Elven King looked at Bilbo with a new wonder. "Bilbo Baggins," he said, "you are more worthy to wear the armor of an elven prince than many who have looked more comely, more handsome, in it. But I wonder if Thorin Oakenshield will see it so. I have more knowledge of dwarves in general than you, perhaps. I advise you to remain with us, and here you shall be honored and thrice welcome." But Bilbo goes back, and for all his anger when Thorin finds out, he remembers how many times Bilbo has saved his and his other members of his company's lives, and so his response is to exile him, and so he goes back to the Elven King, but not before he confronts Thorin and tells him what he's done. I just love this next quote because my dad always used to say this: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's why I put in brackets, as my father used to say. This is the plan that he made in council with the Elven King and with Bard and with Dane, for the Dwarf Lord does now join them, and goblins were foes of all, and at their coming all their quarrels were forgotten. In 27, after the terrible battle of the 5 armies, which only takes 9 pages in The Hobbit, and that's why there's a real cute little comment on it, a little video on it, I think it's on YouTube, called "The Bloating of the 9 Pages," which really makes fun of, first of all, how Bilbo is reduced to a extra in his own story by the guy who makes the Hobbit movies, but also how terribly grotesque it is that you would take these 9 pages out of the book. They're not the most important part of it, not by any long shot, and make a whole movie that goes for 2 hours and more with all kinds of monsters, including sandworms out of Dune. Go figure. But anyway, in the battle, Thorin is mortally wounded, and his 2 nephews, Fili and Kili, are killed. The other dwarves survive. And so now Thorin wants to make peace with Bilbo, and vice versa, of course. "Farewell, good thief," he said. "I go now to the halls waiting to sit beside my fathers until the world is renewed. Since I leave now all gold and silver and go where it is of little worth, I wish to part in friendship from you, and I would take back my words and deeds at the gate." Bilbo knelt on one knee, filled with sorrow. "Farewell, King under the mountain," he said. "This is a bitter adventure, if it must end so, and not a mountain of gold Yet I am glad that I have shared in your perils. That has been more than any Baggins deserves. No, said Thorin. There is more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. Remember, the Shire is clear to the west of the Middle Earth, out towards the sea across which the elves go to return to heaven. Some courage and some wisdom blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, and that goes for you too, that's what I love best. I love food and cheer, meaning being with my friends and having fun, above, and song. Oh, I love song, even though I don't sing very well. Above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. But sad or merry, I must leave it now. Farewell. So they part friends, and that's very important, I think very important. In the battle, Bjorn plays a very important role. And remember, it was Bilbo and Gandalf who first met Bjorn, and it was because of Bilbo's courage that Gandalf is able to win Bjorn's support. And so once again, the hero of the story, though Gandalf does amazing things, and the dwarves do amazing things, and the elves do amazing things, and Bjorn himself do amazing things, the thread that links them all into success is Bilbo. But even with the eagles, they were still outnumbered. Lots of people think the eagles, since Tolkien is writing this after World War II, the eagles stand for the American Air Force. He said that's not true, but I say it is. So you can argue with me or with Tolkien, but there you go. In the last hour, Bjorn himself appeared. No one knew how or from where. He came alone, so remember that if you watch the movie, and his bear's shape. And he seemed to have grown almost to giant size in his wrath. The roar of his voice was like drums and guns, and he tossed wolves and goblins from his path like straws and feathers. He fell upon the rear and broke like a clap of thunder through the ring. The dwarves were making a last stand about their lords under the low round hill. Then Beorn stooped and lifted Thorin, who had fallen pierced with spears, and bore him out of the fray. Swiftly he returned. His wrath was redoubled, so that nothing could withstand him, and no weapon seemed to bite on him. He scattered the bodyguard and pulled down Blog. I'd like to pull down a few blogs myself. This is the king of the northern dwarves, or elves, what are they called? Goblins, the northern goblins, and crushed him. Then dismay fell on all the goblins, and they fled in all directions. Remember, there's no more dangerous time on the battlefield than when you're running away. And it's Bjorn that breaks them and kills their king. But weariness left their enemies, meaning the elves and the men and the dwarves, with the coming of new hope, and they pursued them closely and prevented most of them from escaping where they could. Songs have said that 3 parts of the goblin hordes of the north perished that day. So that's 3/4. 3 out of 4 goblins are killed that day. And the mountain had peace for many years. The mountains had peace for many years. Now we get to Bilbo's poem. He's returning home, much rewarded, with more reward and all he can want to come. He can't even carry the wealth that's his, and he never does really claim it, though it's always there and offered to him. He does take some treasure with him from under the mountain. Of course, as I told you, the Elf King gives Thorin back the Arkenstone. It's buried with him along with Orcus, the magic elven sword, which the Elf King does not demand returned. And but Bilbo on the road home does collect the treasure out of the troll den, but he's giving his poem on his way home, and he shares some of it with Gandalf, who travels some of the way with him. The road goes ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow by winter sown, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever on, under cloud and under star, yet feet that wander have gone, turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known. Gandalf looked at him, meaning Bilbo. My dear Bilbo, he said, something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit you were. And Bilbo goes on to be a great poet and write many, many beautiful poems and songs, and he writes the book that we have been discussing and hopefully that you'll read. Now for the rest of his days. He, Bilbo, took to writing poetry and visiting the elves, going to Rivendell or just out into the forest edges where the elves on their way to the west often come. And though many shook their heads and touched their foreheads and said, poor Baggins, and though few believed any of his tales, he remained very happy to the end of his days. And those were extraordinarily long, as we will find out when we read The Lord of the Rings. And finally, prophecies fulfilled. Remember, there was a prophecy that the river would run with gold. What Bilbo brought about by his courage and his wisdom and his service changes the world. Bard had rebuilt the town of Dale. This is years later when Bilbo was back on visits. Or maybe this is the report from the dwarves to him. This is just a report from the dwarves to him. And Lake Town was refounded and was more prosperous than ever, and much wealth went up and down the running river, and there was friendship in those parts between elves and dwarves and men. Then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true after a fashion, said Bilbo. Of course, said Gandalf. Oh, it's Gandalf that's telling him this. And why should not they prove true? Surely you don't believe the prophecies because you had a part in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? In other words, God had something to do with your success, Bilbo. Of course, he's using a worthy person to do that. Don't forget that. You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you. But you are only quite a little fellow in the wide world, after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing and handing him his tobacco jar. And yes, lots of our heroes in Tolkien smoke, but back in the 60s, almost everybody smoked, including many of my heroes. So just be strong and know that that's not a wise choice to make. Well, thank you for your time today. There'll be, as I said, a test and some answers for you to go through. And then we look forward to being with you on Friday. Thank you very much for being here at Connor's Corner, the Church Street campus of Layton High. Goodbye.